Man, I was just Googling to just look up some stories. Sometimes I like to share some happy news or something interesting that I've noticed related to mental health or one of the subjects we've touched upon. And I just came across this article using recreational fear to overcome anxiety. Very cool stuff. I mean, the publication is The Star. I don't really know what that is. So it could just be trash. I mean, nothing against The Star. I really have no idea what that is. But basically, the gist of the article is that recreational fear, like watching a movie that's scary or like going on a roller coaster, could help us practice handling our anxiety and fear, which is very interesting and also hilarious because I'm practicing my fear by watching something scary, which just results in me not sleeping for weeks. Hey everyone, I'm Patrick Jones, and welcome to episode 40 of That Gives Me Anxiety. So yeah, I think I need to reach out to the researchers on who provided the expertise for this article because this is very interesting stuff. But I've got a great episode lined up for today. Today our anxiety is caused by self-help and a little bit of social anxiety. That's sprinkled in there as well. It's just so funny to me that put yourself in this scenario. A friend comes to you and is like, "Oh, I just got this new book I'm really liking," and it's you're probably going to say something like, "Oh yeah, what is it?" Self-help. I mean, your reaction is going to be like, "I'm talking to a loser," which is crazy, right? It's crazy that we have that reaction related to self-help. You look down on that person. Maybe not you, because you're listening to a podcast about anxiety. So I would hope that you, the person I'm thinking of and talking right now to, wouldn't look down in that way. But, life is a little bit bigger than the audience of this podcast. It's also hilarious to think that you're expected to have all the answers. No outside sources. You can't read about these things. So you just suffer, right? That's just the end result. So to help me out to talk about self-help and social anxiety, I have Dr. Rebecca DiVerniero. She's been a professor of interpersonal communication for years and is also the creator of the Social Anxiety Academy. I feel like I slur social all the time. I don't know if it's one of those things that I just hear it, but it's like my insecurity, or are you hearing that too? So yeah, Rebecca and I, putting my insecurities aside, Rebecca and I had a great chat about self-help, social anxiety, and two loud New Yorkers dealing with moving out of New York and what the world is like outside of New York. So before we get to that interview, I just want to remind you, if you're liking the show, to please remember to rate and review it on whatever platform you're listening to it on. If you're liking the show, you can also donate to it through the Buy Me a Coffee link. It's in the description wherever you're listening. And if you're liking the show, why don't you check it out on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube, or YouTube. YouTube is where the live episodes, the video episodes. You can look at my Spoon, the band t-shirt, and my tie-dye water cup. It's fun. It's like squishy and stuff. So yeah, why don't we make our way to the interview? As always, thank you so much for listening, and enjoy. Joining me now on the podcast is Rebecca DiVerniero. It's so much pressure, right? I just nailed it. We were talking about this, so much pressure. Who's a social anxiety coach and also holds a PhD in interpersonal communication. Rebecca, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me and pronouncing my name correctly.
Yeah, just Long Island through and through. A lot of Italian people. And yeah, it's a cool last name. Much better than mine, just Jones.
Yeah, it's okay. I'm sure you make up for it in other ways. I base my whole personality on my last name, so
We all have our gimmicks, right?
Yeah.
Well, we're going to be talking today about self-help, but why don't we start by you introducing yourself to everybody?
Sure. I am a former academic. I taught for 18 years in the communication studies field. And it's actually interesting because now I work with socially anxious people who don't understand how I did that. But that's a whole nother podcast.
What, just having to be in front of people and
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
which
it's
is
a lot.
terrifying. And so my background is mostly in pumping as much information into my head as possible. And it was logically driven my whole life. So you read as many articles as you can, you read as many books as you can, you're an expert in your field. And so because of that, I never really worked on myself outside of that, which is why I came up with this topic, because self-help wasn't really a thing that I knew about. And once I found out about it, I was like, I don't think this is a thing for me. I think it's for other people. So because my background is so logic heavy, there wasn't really a lot of space to like get in touch with feelings, or even though I teach interpersonal communication, which is about feelings.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I'm a very late comer into the self-help world, and I'm still constantly confused about what I should be doing and what advice I should be following and what advice I should be giving.
Well, there's a lot of different ways you could take it, right? It's the nice thing is I went to film school, and one of the things that was taught to us is there's many ways to be right. There's many ways, I'm sure, in the self-help industry to help yourself, I guess.
Yeah, and I would say that's one of the bonuses, but also potentially one of the problems. Like which thing works best for me, especially if you aren't in touch with your emotions or don't really know yourself. How do you decide how to navigate all those messages?
Like ordering food at a diner is just right. There's a lot of choices.
You taste a little bit of each thing for
sure.
Here
you go. More like a buffet than that.
Right. Yeah.
One interesting thing about self-help is I feel like only recently has it been widely permitted, right? I feel like growing up, there was a sense of you were pathetic if you, like, even that harsh of a word, not just soft, pathetic for doing that. And, and what do you think has brought along that change?
Well, I think part of it, I assume we're around the same age and we're both from New York. So I was born in the early 80s. I'm from New York. And it was like laughable to even think about working on yourself. Like your life is your life and you deal with it, end of story. So in addition to the New York attitude towards that, also the 80s, mental health wasn't really something that we got to talk about much. And so certainly the time was different. And I was probably 20 before I even realized that self-help was a thing, but it was still very much portrayed as this is what pathetic, super emotional people do. And I was like, well, I know I don't want to be like that. So I barely even acknowledged that whole world. I went to therapy a handful of times, stuff like that, but I never really got it. And I don't know that my therapist really got me, because I was just like, logically, this is my life and this is what I have to deal with. So I didn't understand that change was an option. And I think representations of self-help didn't help them. I remember watching an episode of Sex and the City when I was about 20. And one of the characters, Charlotte, is getting divorced, and she goes to a bookstore and goes into the self-help section, and people are like laying on the floor crying and everyone's super uncomfortable, like eating their hair. And she goes to get a book, and one woman who's sobbing on the floor goes, "Oh yeah, that one helped me a lot." And Charlotte, the character, puts the book back and goes running and pretending that she was supposed to be in a different section of the bookstore. So that was my real introduction to what that might mean. And then I remember Tony Robbins being a thing around the same time. Like he was really big. But I would listen to what he said and I'd be like, what is he even talking about? It just didn't make any sense because our upbringing was so different. So I think part of it is, the mental health itself being something that is much less taboo now, and that there are places like the internet, even though there's a million things wrong with the internet and the things people say and do on the internet. There's apparently, I thought Instagram was just puppy and kitten photos. But once I started looking for more self-help stuff, I was like, oh, there's a whole other side to Instagram, and it's very positive and supportive. And I never would have even thought to look for it until I decided I wanted to work in that space.
Yeah, that's
So,
great news.
so I think part of it is depending on your age and what you grew up with, you have to actually go look for those things because it's not obvious.
Yeah.
And it's looked down on.
Right. It's almost like something you have to do in the shadows, right?
Right.
But you don't. I mean, that's conversations like this are meant to show that it's ludicrous to think that way. Yeah. I'd love to get a definition. How would you define self-help?
Well, I think self-help can be a lot of things, but it's essentially self-improvement in some way. And so a lot of it does base itself off of, yes, these are the cards you were dealt. So kind of the first half of what I learned growing up, like, this is your life, but if you do these different things, or if you change your perspective, you can be something else. So I realized once I started looking at all these things that I'd been doing that in the classroom my entire career. And my students would come in, assume, well, I was a nerd in high school. That's it for my whole life. Like, nobody likes me. I don't have friends. And I'd be like, no, here are these logical reasons you're wrong. And I would watch their self-esteem grow.
Oh, that's awesome.
I never thought, hey, maybe I should do this for myself. Because it just didn't make any sense to me. So I guess self-help would just be acknowledging that your perspective might be limited and seeing how you can grow whatever avenue you need to grow in.
I love that. So let me get this straight. In today's day and age, you're supposed to be drinking a ton of water, doing yoga, making sure you and your whole family is happy, strike a good work-life balance, exercise, read books, watch movies, eat healthy meals, be a big part of your community, and get 8 hours of sleep. It's unrealistic. It's too much. Well, that's why there's Instacart to take a little bit off your plate, or help put a little bit on your plate. Oh, I'm so sorry. Using Instacart, you search for all your favorite foods and items that you need from the grocery store, fresh produce, all your favorites, everything you want, and they deliver it to you. They go to the store and do your shopping for you. Just remove it from your to-do list, just with a few clicks. And you'll have your items delivered to your door in as fast as an hour. It's pretty quick. And through the link in the episode description, they're offering free delivery on your first order over $35. But you got to make sure you click the link in the description. That tells Instacart that this show sent you, and it helps support the show. And you can also take advantage of the free delivery. So yeah, be nice to yourself. Give Instacart a shot. To share a story, I didn't realize how rigid I was until I started living with my fiance, and like how accepting I was of like, this is just the way things are. Like, so much so when I get into a car, let's say we get a rental car and the seat is like pushed forward a little bit, like I just sit there and accept it. And my fiance will look at me like, what are you doing? Move this, like you can move the seat and make yourself comfortable. It's horrifying to think how much I just accepted it throughout my whole life until a couple of years ago when I finally was like, really? Oh, I can be better.
Yeah. And it seems like a lot of people choose maybe one aspect of their life where they go for it. Like you do stand up, right?
Yeah, I do like sketch and improv and a little bit of everything.
Yeah. So like that is insane to me. I could never get in front of a room full of people and cross my fingers and hope I made them laugh. So to me, that is not an option, even though literally it is. So I feel like you figured out that component. For me, it was school and moving away from New York and like living my life elsewhere. So because I guess because I figured that part out, I thought that was kind of all I could put my effort into. And I was putting so much effort into constantly learning and helping my students. there wasn't really even a thought in my head of you should probably feel better when you're not in the classroom. I was
Yeah.
like, no, I'm just an unhappy person. The end of story.
Oh God. Well, I'm glad you're laughing about that, because that
Yeah, a
stinks.
little sounds dramatic, but it was really my mindset.
Yeah. It's interesting to hear you talk about moving out of New York. I think I was thinking about this. I moved out of New York. I live in Charleston, South Carolina now,
Mm-hmm.
and a physical move like that has allowed me to become the person I want to be, and a little
Mm-hmm.
bit more in a physical. Like I don't know what it is. Maybe it's just maybe you can shed some insight on your experience. But yeah, it's. I feel like I'm able to introduce myself as the person who I expect to be, as opposed to people holding you in one snapshot of who you were at one point in your life, right?
Yeah. And so I think everyone should get away from wherever home is for a year or two at least, just because people will see you differently and you're not like trapped in this identity. So for me, even though I absolutely love New York and go back whenever I can, it was very important for my self-development to get out of there, because I was only ever going to be that version of me, because
Mhm.
how other people respond totally changes who we're allowed to be in a given space. And a lot of my research when I first got into grad school was about like regional differences and what you decide to like cling on to from places you might have lived before versus what you accept from the place that you're in is a lot of identity work. And identity work is really important, so you feel like you have some control over how you're perceived by other people.
Very
But I don't,
interesting. Yeah.
yeah, I think a lot of people don't realize they have some of that power. It might just be their environment that's the problem.
It's very surprising how people react to you when they don't know you, right? I mean, you certainly get more benefit of the doubt, and it's a mirror being held up to, like, people see you in a different way, and it may be the way that
Mm-hmm.
completely changes your outlook on yourself, right?
Yeah, I mean, I went into the classroom my first day when I was 23 and I was like, what the hell am I doing? Like no one ever listened to anything I ever said in my family or in New York.
No.
But then I walked into the classroom and they sat there and they paid attention, and I asked them to get their books and they got their books, and I was like, holy crap, things are different here. So because of that, I was able to grow. I mean, I could have just manipulated the hell out of them, but I chose to use it to like,
Use that power for good.
right, like build my own confidence and help them because they were willing to listen to me.
Mm-hmm.
So whether it's an actual physical move or just finding a new context where people are willing to give you some power, I think provides a lot of that self-help opportunity.
Mm-hmm. I have my list of questions here, but I'm very interested if you can speak to some of your research that you were talking about, general, what people cling to in areas of the country. I don't know if there's anything that you can speak to on that.
Sure. I also taught and still sometimes teach an intercultural class, and the students come in thinking we're going to learn about like Japan.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm like, if you literally go 90 minutes from where you live, you're in an entirely different culture. And so
Mm-hmm.
what the norms are, what the expectations are, change so much. And like you were saying, make you seen in a different light, that you potentially have much more or much less power. For instance, I, from New York, have lived in the Southeast and the Midwest, but then I moved to Utah when I was 30. And I think I stepped my toe into the state and people were yelling at me for not having children. So I would have random strangers come up to me when I was, say, sitting in a restaurant eating or just watching a football game at a bar and get in my face about, why aren't you at home with children? Why are you here? And I was like, what the hell is happening?
Did you
And
move to 1887? Like what?
that's what it felt like, but it really just was. They did not know what to do with a female in her 30s who didn't have a husband or children, and they tried to kind of like push me into that that's what they were used to.
Mm.
And so I think that that's true no matter where we go. Obviously, Utah, it was Southwest specifically. Southwest Utah was very pushy when it came to my identity. I had to constantly fight. Every time I left the house, I had to fight with somebody. So very quickly, I told my boss, I cannot live here anymore. But I also know that somewhere like I had students who lived in Utah who went to Seattle for their missions, and they felt the same way. Like they constantly had to say, I'm still important, even though I'm not like you. So depending on where you go, people will feel a certain amount of entitlement to tell you who you are and how you should be acting. And then there's certainly places where people are more hands off, but I find that you have to still fit into a degree. Like when I go to Portland, I end up accidentally dressing like everybody there because I am eccentric and I like to wear whatever I wear. I have no sense of style. And so in Portland, people are like, oh my gosh, I have the same t-shirt. So I end up fitting in by accident. Whereas in New York, people are horrified if I'm not perfectly dressed from head to toe. And so those social norms, people forget that they are norms as opposed to laws. And I think that's what a lot of the identity work, like struggle is. If people don't understand this is just what you're used to as opposed to what is right or wrong, that's where it can be difficult to be who you want to be, depending on where you are.
Very interesting stuff. One thing that's been surprising for me here in South Carolina is like everyone assumes I have a pickup truck. And it's like, nah, I don't.
Yeah. We, when my family moved to North Carolina, the first day that we were there, we were unpacking things from the moving truck, and someone in a pickup truck drove by and honked the horn. And we thought that they were giving us the finger because we had just left New York. And it turns out they were like being friendly and waving. And my stepfather turned around, gave double finger and like yelled at them. And we were like, oh, things are different.
That's great. Here. You want somebody? Here it
is. Yeah, exactly. So we were those people for the first little while.
That's hilarious. Oh my gosh. Look who we got here. It's our friends at My Software Tutor. Can Excel be my friend? Many people have wondered this for years. The answer is yes, it can. Excel doesn't have to be like the friend that your mom makes you hang out with in elementary school. It's weird. It's always stuff with boogers, right? What's wrong? What's up? Why is that kid always eating boogers? Their house always had the best snacks too. And there he is. Boogers. Well, Excel doesn't have to be like that weird kid. Unless you were that weird kid. Were you? Be honest. You know. I'm not actually asking. I can't hear your response, but you know. And it's okay if you were. Just take it easy with the boogers. Just talking about boogers to Oregon ad read. Don't worry. They didn't write that part. That was an improvisation. My Software Tutor offers 3 levels of real-time Zoom-based courses with a live instructor. They deliver practical, functional business skills in a friendly and supportive environment. It can be daunting, right? You need that supporting environment to learn Excel. There's no stupid questions. It could be really difficult. And as we know, when we talk about it on this podcast all the time, it could be really daunting to learn something new and put yourself out there. So think of this as like a kindergarten for learning something new and helping your job prospects. Or be better at the job you already have. Get that raise, get that whatever, take pictures of it for Instagram. Yeah, that'll be cool. Keeping it as vague as possible so that you can input your own. Just making a mad lib of your own desires. These courses will increase your marketability, whether you're an employee, job seeker, consultant, or contractor. Register at mysoftwaretutor.com and use the promo code POD20 to save 20% off all registrations. Thank you so much to My Software Tutor. Yeah, guys, take advantage of that 20% off and confidently list Excel on your resume. So someone is finally turned on to the idea of seeking self-help. what then, right? It can feel so daunting,
Yeah.
especially if you're not exposed to things or don't have a friend group that talks
Hmm.
about these things.
Yeah, if you don't have the social support, it makes it all much scarier. One of the reasons I do like sites like Instagram is you can peruse at your own
Mm-hmm.
pace and decide what you like versus not. And I mean, I've technically liked everything I've seen, but there's some things that work for you and things that don't. And so you kind of have to at least get in touch with what makes me the most comfortable so that I can change. So,
Mm-hmm.
for instance, a lot of self help, and I understand why it's not funny, but it's not funny. It doesn't make me laugh. It helps me, like, understand that I have feelings that are deeper than maybe the New York anger everybody sees. But I need to laugh occasionally. I have a dark sense of humor because of my hot mess of a brain, and I need to joke about how ridiculous life is.
Mm-hmm.
So once I was able to realize that, I started following people who had a sense of humor, and like this podcast, really, like it's not meant to be super serious. We're talking about anxiety, but it's not, we don't have to feel bad the whole time. We get to
No, my
joke
God,
about
no. It's
how
more fun to laugh about it. Yeah.
right, exactly. So because I realized a sense of humor makes me comfortable, and it also means I can have a sense of humor. I had to target those kinds of self-help leaders or whoever, if I was going to change the way I acted. The serious stuff is still good, and I certainly have times where I need that too.
Mm-hmm.
But I think anybody who's ready to make a change has to find accounts or guides or coaches or whatever else where you can see enough similarity in your personality that you'll be comfortable around these people.
And being okay with, you're probably not going to marry the first person you go on a date with, right? Like
Right.
you try and see how things fit, and it's not a knock on somebody if it doesn't, if it's not
Right.
working for you.
There's so many things for free where you can dip your toe in, or you can dip it in for less than $50. I just got a business coach because I have no freaking clue what I'm doing in the business world. But I watched her for 6 months for free give presentations and webinars. And I was like, okay, I know that she'll help me recognize the reality of how business might go. She
Mm-hmm.
won't pretend that everything's perfect, but this will also be fun. And so it took me 6 full months of eyeballing her and not paying her any money to decide that. And so that's what I would suggest for people who are looking out for self-help help. In spite of the title, you probably can't do all of it yourself. So if you are
Mm-hmm.
looking for guidance, really watch how people communicate and the kind of things that they offer and go from there.
Yeah, that's great advice. I so another aspect of self-help is that, I mean, just like with diets and different get rich quick schemes,
Sure.
there's a lot of nonsense, right? There's a lot of
Mm-hmm.
schemes out there. So how do you think people can differentiate between something that might be something worth a shot, whether or not it
Mm-hmm.
works for them, or something that is just a
Fluff.
house of cards, right? Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things I did, because like I said, I knew I needed help with the business stuff, but I had no idea where to start. And so I signed up for every single free thing I could find. And something like Instagram, because it has an algorithm that sends you ads based on your interest, it's super easy to just rack up 20 options in your inbox. Yeah, you have to be on their email address or their email server or whatever, but you have something free. You can watch it without, a lot of people have pre-recorded things that you can watch for free too. So they're
Mm-hmm.
not like in front of your face pressuring you to make a commitment to anything. And from watching all those things, I probably watched 50 different sales pitches. I was able to see who led with their money and
Mm-hmm.
who led with, here are the actual benefits to you, and here's what I've been able to help other people do. So I think for me, if all you have to talk about is money or making money, I'm not really interested, even if they might be perfectly valid programs or whatever. I prefer the interpersonal aspect of working with someone, and also, that they have success stories that aren't just monetary.
Yeah.
So I think one of the people I follow for self-help stuff is, I'm going to say it wrong, Dr. Glenn Doyle. And he has quotes of his own books and speeches every single day that he puts out on his Instagram. And they really resonate with me. So that's one of the reasons that I follow him and I share his stuff, because it hits home. So I think that's also something you should look for, like among the, 10 people who seem okay, which one of them seems to have a similar perspective, but different enough that you can grow.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, you just don't want to feel like your mental health and self-help stuff is coming from like a used car salesman.
Right. It's sleazy out there.
Yeah, absolutely. I studied interpersonal communication a little bit, and I find it super interesting. So I'd love to share with the audience like a few tenets of interpersonal communication and some things that you feel are most important for people to know.
Sure. Interpersonal communication overall is the relationships we have with people in our lives where we are interdependent with them. So something like a boss, what they decide to do affects me and vice versa, right? So even though it's not a close relationship or it's not necessarily a good relationship, it is interdependent. The same is true of my partner. It's a good relationship, but any decision he makes does affect me and vice versa. So interpersonal communication mostly focuses on understanding and improving those kinds of interdependent relationships, where it really does matter how someone acts or how they speak, because it actively affects you. And so that is the core of what it means. But a lot of the push I had when I taught up till a month ago, I taught these ideas up till a month ago, was I didn't realize it at the time, but were mindfulness ideas, where you have to actively listen if you want a good relationship. You have to be present with someone. You have to put in effort even before there's something wrong. And so basically, I took all the terrible relationships I had, used those as examples and said, don't do these things, and found out only recently that I was speaking about the same thing that a lot of self-help people focus on, which, they sound like, to me at the time, hippie, free love ideas that were for people from California, not people from New York. So interpersonal communication really does have a lot of self-help opportunities within it, because you have to improve yourself if you're going to be a good partner, a good friend, a good whatever else. But the other person has to do all those things too.
Right. Listening is so important, instead of just thinking about what you're going to say next and waiting, just like blank. Some people feel like they're just like sitting there. Oh, she's done talking. Now I get to talk and come back to life. Right.
Right.
It's not a recipe for a healthy conversation or relationship. My goodness.
Right. Yeah. And I've struggled with that, not being in the classroom anymore, because there it was always a conversation. And so I like being on podcasts because it's conversation. I don't want to be in charge the whole time. Like, I want to know what you think, and then it changes what I think. And so it's a lot of work, but it's
worth it. I mean, you don't get anything out of conversations if you're not giving and taking. That's why I always stress how I think every person should take an improv class, because it hones in your listening skills and just helps you in so many aspects of your life. So that's my improv pitch.
Yeah, I took drama as a high school student. It absolutely helped me understand other people better.
Yeah, a little more empathy in the world would go a long way.
Really?
So someone comes to you and wants to work with you. What does that look like? How do you start to see if the relationship is a fit?
Yeah, since I'm at the beginning, it is a little chaotic and messy, but what I'm finding is that, even though my focus is on social anxiety, social anxiety is often just a symptom of a host of other issues.
Hmm.
So we have to kind of decide, is this the issue you want to work on? Because those other things are important and they will influence everything we're doing. But I have to make sure that social anxiety is the focus because I am not trained in major trauma
Hmm.
support, or so I kind of have a checklist in my head of this will create a good relationship where I can actively give them advice that is actionable and they can change, or they have other things that are much more important right now for them to work on. And I assume on the other side, it's does she have new insights that I haven't heard before? And because I come from a communication perspective, I try to illustrate those. This isn't the same song and dance you've seen from other people. So I think that with those conversations that I've had, they get to see if I have anything interesting to say that they haven't heard before. And I get to see if social anxiety is the thing they should be focusing on
Hmm.
right now. Because if they
Yeah.
really need like PTSD support, I'm
Hmm.
probably not the person for them.
Right. Yeah. Oh man, it is. I haven't really thought of approaching social anxiety from an interpersonal communication perspective, right? Because it's a lot of it is based on a fear of rejection, and so that
Yeah.
makes me think of going to therapy. But you can improve so much by focusing on this aspect of if you're bringing your best self and you're truly listening to people, it lessens
Mm-hmm.
the chance of a rejection because at the end of the day, people will be like, oh, well, they're nice, right? They listened and they asked questions and yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of it is just here's some interpersonal skills that will definitely make your chances better at enjoying the social interactions you have. But I also study and taught classes on the dark side of interpersonal communication, which is essentially a lot of how social anxiety is created. Because unlike depression, which you're probably born with, social anxiety can be one or both. You can be born with it, or it can be created, or both. And so, because of that, other people, if you're around really critical people, if you never really get a break from parents or peers or bosses, then that creates social anxiety for you. And so I try to approach it from that angle. Like, we have all of these outside pressures from people in our lives, social institutions saying women and men should be like this, or whatever age you are, this is how you should look. And so it
Mm-hmm.
creates all this anxiety because people think, well, I'm not doing what I should be doing, or I don't look like I should look. And so I try to come from it from that, I think, more realistic angle where it's not just here, let me give you a couple of skills and you're going to go have a great life. Like, no, we're going to acknowledge that this isn't easy, but it's not easy for anybody. And this
Mm-hmm.
is how they're getting through it. And here's maybe what you're not seeing.
That's a beautiful thing. I love that. Hey, do you wish you were a thoughtful card person but don't have the time or energy? Right? You want to be that person that has a hobby, full time job, crushing it in the job, has kids, has a family, has a dog, whatever it is, and still, right, sends that message, sends a card, handwritten, something that makes you laugh and cry. How does that person do it? I don't know. But maybe it's cardist. Maybe he's born with it. Maybe it's cardist. The Carta Studio is your personal assistant. That's how you get it done, right? Somebody helps you out with it. That's okay. The end result is still the end result. You're thinking, oh, should I send them a card? That's it. From there, you just jump onto thecartastudio.com and tell them exactly what just popped in your head. Your thoughtfulness. The Carta Studio will get your personalized message handwritten into the card and in the mail for you. You're busy. You're doing a lot of other things. It's not like they're going to tell on you. And the person's going to be thrilled. I've gotten one of these, and it filled my heart with joy. Even better, it's fast, it's custom, and it's a total life changer. Hey, you're a thoughtful card person now. Look at you. New achievement unlocked. Just go to thecartastudio.com, and you can even use the promo code AnxietyPod for 10% off all orders. Yeah, and just like as a society, I mean, like you're describing, everyone so needs to put somebody in a box. And I feel like the more we all educate ourselves in that, like, that's ludicrous. Like, take every person at face value. Like, how busy are you that you just have to put somebody in a box? Like, take time to get to know people.
Yeah, I only have 0.01 second to decide who you are just based on how you're sitting and the fact that you're a man, and that's it.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, if literally just letting people prove us wrong is part of what can lessen our social anxiety. I have, for instance, I've been told many times I have resting bitch face, because people will just look at me. I think part of it's just being a female and not constantly smiling. And so in that second, someone has decided that I fit into that category, and then I have to prove myself. Whereas if we just gave people a second, they would find that I'm only a bitch sometimes. I just look like one all the time.
Yeah. That's great. So I have a similar situation where people assume, I've been told my whole life that people assume that I'm going to be an asshole because they say I look like a villain from an 80s movie. And that holds water whenever we go somewhere and I have to like talk to a waiter or something and my fiance is not there, like they'll be rude to me and like they are standoffish. So I always feel as though I have to give like 120% of like charm, which is exhausting, but I just don't want people to look at me like a villain. Right.
Right. Like I have to go out of my way to prove I'm not the person you just decided I am. And it can get exhausting, and that alone can cause social anxiety. Like I'd rather just not leave the house if that's how I'm going to get treated. And so that's another component of what people deal with, even though they think a lot of people don't understand that's why they're getting the reactions that they do. As that people are just making instant decisions about you, and that says more about the other person, I think, than it says about you.
But it's hard to you know, when you're being treated that way, it's hard to see that, but it is accurate.
Yeah, and it frankly, people saying that I have resting bitch face is what turns me into kind of, you know, like I'm not going to respond to that, and then I'm going to just reinforce what they decided about me.
Because it's exhausting. You're not going to change their mind, right? Like they've already decided.
Yeah.
What would you say to someone who's making their way either in social anxiety sense or in a self-help sense, and feeling a little bit stuck? How do you kind of get unstuck and get back on the path towards improving your mental health?
I think that taking breaks is honestly a valid idea. It just, you don't want to lose momentum. And so everybody's different. Everybody's breaks probably need to take different amounts of time. But giving yourself a break, because working on yourself all day, every day isn't realistic. You're a human being, you have other things to do. And so if you wanted to work on something like social anxiety, then maybe you do that once a week. Clients I've had in the past, I've said, if you can just give yourself 1 hour a week to go try to be social and put up with the things you don't like a lot of the people I work with are introverts. Like, of course you hate going to a new place and meeting new people because you have to have these meaningless conversations you don't enjoy, but you will never find a friend or people that you don't feel anxious around if you don't have these conversations. And so once you can strip the dread away from those smaller things, then you can kind of, I think, find another layer of what you can do now. I think all self-help should be incremental because it's just way too terrifying to do at once. And you probably, especially if you have anxiety, will not physically respond well to it. So I would never suggest anybody dives headfirst into the self-help world. You dip your toe in, and then when you get used to that, you find a way to go a little deeper. And there's probably no end, but there's certainly places where you're going to be more comfortable and can pause for a while.
Yeah, that's great advice. Yeah, I love that. It's also, you know, when you go out and you meet someone who's a jerk, when you eventually do meet someone who's cool and you become friends with, now you have this amazing story typically, right? If you just view it as like, you take the pressure off of that, right? Like people, it's fun to share stories where people are a jerk.
Exactly. Like my horror stories from Utah basically drive half my communication lessons now, because
Mhm.
I'm like, look at how crazy these people were, because I just looked a certain way. And so we're able to use it. And so I think the same thing, like you said, is true, that if you have those bad experiences and you don't let them debilitate you, you can use them as learning
Mhm.
experiences. And obviously, you don't talk to that person again. You find
Yeah,
other people to talk to.
there's plenty. There's what,
Yeah.
8 billion now?
I
Yeah,
mean,
there's
how many bad date stories are there? That's It's not any different when you're trying to meet new people for
we would be
friendships.
on if I started going down the list of bad dates, you'd have to clear your month.
Really, it's its own whole coaching world because
Yeah.
it's such a disaster.
Oh man, yeah, geez. Just briefly, but I once went on an app date with a woman who was so drunk. She showed up so drunk, she started eating the full edamame instead of like popping it.
Oh,
Yeah, special
that might have
lady.
been me. It
Yeah.
might have been me. I've definitely done both those things. Um,
Oh man.
so I am proudly some people's bad date stories.
Yeah, I'm sure I'm somebody's bad date too. I'm not perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I've really enjoyed this conversation. It's been a lot of fun to joke around it and also give out some good advice here. I just want to make sure, is there anything you think I'm missing?
I think one of the key parts of self-help is that it and maybe also therapy and also medication, depending on your situation, is that self-help can teach you to be reflective in a way where you don't beat yourself up.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the corner I turned finally a few years ago. I did get on Prozac first, and
I'm on it
but I had
currently.
yeah, it's great.
Yeah,
I
big
love
help.
Prozac.
Yeah.
But I had no social support at the time. I really had to figure a lot out myself, and looking at whether it was just Instagram or actually working with coaches or guides or yogis or whatever happened to work for me at the time. A lot of it was just realizing, when I think about who I am, I don't have to lash, myself.
Mm-hmm.
I can think about myself in a productive way and figure out what is okay and what I could work on. And you can do both things. You can self-improve and be okay with yourself at the same time.
Love that. That's amazing advice. Yeah. So, where can people get a hold of you if they want to work with you, and also your social media?
Yeah, my Instagram handle is at Surviving Social Anxiety. And my website is also Surviving Social Anxiety. It's in a bit of a reconstruction phase. So I would
Mm-hmm.
suggest the Instagram, because I'll put any offer I have, I'll put on there anyway.
Cool.
And also there's memes every Friday. So that's really why we're all on the
Who doesn't
internet
love
to
memes?
begin.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you just want to see what I'm about, you can come to the Instagram, and you can always direct message if you have actual questions about working together.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. I've really enjoyed meeting you and getting to know you a little bit, and we'll be in touch.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Of course.
So what do we learn? The self-help section isn't just like a sad place, like that scene from Sex and the City that Rebecca mentioned. Yeah, just being nicer to people that are trying to work on themselves, and being nicer to yourself is for the best, right? So I have a good one for the weird thing that gave me anxiety this week. But before we get there, I just want to thank Rebecca. Thank you so much for coming on. I want to remind everyone of my other podcast called Death Space Filling the Void. Find it wherever you get your podcasts. If you're liking the show and you want to make a donation, you can through the Buy Me a Coffee link. It's in the description wherever you are listening. I don't know why my brain just shut down. Also, there's the Instacart link where you can sign up for Instacart. And by doing it through the link from this podcast, it tells them that this show, man, I could feel the slur coming on. This show sent you. And that also helps support the show. We're also supported by My Software Tutor. They've got the promo code POD20 for 20% off, like courses and ways of helping yourself, like with Excel, things like that. And then there's the Carta Studio with the promo code AnxietyPod for 10% off your order.
send a nice card to somebody. They'll definitely appreciate it. Okay, so the weird thing that caused anxiety. Jamie's birthday went real well. I think I don't know what the chop was there. We rented a boat for her birthday, and we're zooming around Charleston. Pretty rough conditions for a somewhat inexperienced boat driver, but it was low tide. And at one point, we were just like letting the boat float, and we were nowhere near the shore, but it hit the ground. And so we had to get out and push it. And so this was happening to a lot of people that were in the area. You could see it happening. But it's like but it's like the second you put your foot in this like marshy area that we're in, it's just like, it was like stepping in quicksand, and you're like pushing a boat, and you're like looking around for alligators. It's right. It allows your imagination the freedom to invent any situation that could go wrong. Are we going to push it and the boat's just going to like float away, and I'm going to have to like wade through all this muck? It does not make me feel like a brave person to admit this. But yeah, we were able to push it out, and a lot of other boats were doing the same thing, and everyone was laughing, so it was just like a collective, funny thing to see other people going through while you're also just like, oh, God. So yeah, anyway, that was a really fun weekend, and I'm looking forward to doing it again, except I hope I don't have to put my little toesies in the mucky. Well, as always, thank you so much for listening. Have a great week, and I'll talk to you on Thursday.